In recent years, movies that include time travel have become more and more confusing. But as a kid and as a young man, well, younger than I am now, because I'm so young and down with the young people, I really enjoyed movies that had element of time travel in the premise. And I'm dating myself. I remember as kids watching movies like Back to the Future and Time Machine, and all those ones that kind of were, I guess, movies of their time. So I thought what I might do today is I might hop on my magical Dojo time machine and go back and talk about what my recipe would be if I could go back and give myself advice about how I would train to be a martial artist. What would be the things that would change? What would be the things that would remain the same? And most importantly, how would I become the martial arts god that I've always wanted to be if I could go back and change everything? Kia ora, I'm Tuari Dawson, and you're listening to the Invisible Sensei podcast. So, a couple things up front. As I'm talking to you, I'm looking at a very small diagram that I did a couple of weeks ago, and it's on my phone. And so I'm decided not to use my glasses because I couldn't see them. And as I'm speaking to you, I see that I brought them in, so I'm going to put them on. This is me putting my glasses on. There we go. And now I can actually see what I was talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the description and put this podcast recording up on my YouTube channel so you can see the diagram that I'm referring to if you're interested in doing such a thing. And I'm going to give you my raw, unfiltered reactions to what I wrote a couple of weeks ago. I only pulled it out and had a bit of a scan over it today, and I thought, well, what an interesting thing to do for a podcast, or at least to me. So here we go. And what I've done is I've separated into sort of periods of time and sort of brought it up to, ideally what would I be doing now? The only thing that I can actually do now is what I'm doing now. But anyway, let's give it a shot. So I've got in there on the left-hand side, meditation, history, culture, and tradition. So they're kind of in a red circle, which denotes that those are kind of, what's the word? That those are implacable. Those are things that I would always, if I had the choice and I'd known about it younger, I would have added in just as a ongoing field of study. So meditation, in the sense that I do enjoy meditation and I do enjoy reflection, and I'm a big proponent of it. History, culture, and tradition. I think it's really important to understand from a personal perspective who I am, but also when I'm getting into these arts, I actually really like the language, the history, the culture, and the tradition. I think sometimes it's really easy to kind of focus on the martial aspect of it, but I like the cultural aspect of it. I like hearing the stories and so on and so forth. Also, I've also got on the right-hand side in two red circles, kohai and senpai. So the idea of understanding what kohai and senpai actually meant and seeking good senpai. So if you're not familiar with the term, kohai being the younger and senpai being the older or the more senior, which is very similar to a Māori concept, and you'll find in a lot of indigenous cultures it's true of the younger sister, older sister, younger man, older man, so on and so forth. Also, I've got teaching. Now, I can't remember, to be honest, I can't remember why I put teaching in there, but I'm going to assume that it was about learning how to teach, like seeking actual guidance on how do you pass this stuff on? How do you teach it? Because I think sometimes, when you learn these things, there's an expectation that you can just kind of pass them on, knowing them, that you can kind of pass them on. And that's not always the case. I've known many people who are great fighters, great martial artists, but can't teach. I've known great teachers that are not so great fighters and not so great martial artists, but they have the ability to teach and pass on in a really talented, interesting way. But that's not to say that everyone has that natural ability. I think teachers who are good teachers are really good at helping people to learn the art of teaching and helping you to develop a style. One of the ways in which my sensei, I think perhaps unconsciously or perhaps consciously, was getting me to teach children, which I was terrible at in the beginning, and I've steadily over the years have gone by become somewhat better at it. Maybe he recognised that I was a crap teacher and I needed to learn how to pass these things on. I don't know. So my first big circle in my illustration, in my chart, if you will, my cookbook, is the period between 10 and 15 years. I actually started martial arts when I was about 5, but I probably got it into most seriously after I saw my first Bruce Lee movie when I was around 10. So that marked a change in the ways that I did these things. So what I've done is I'm kind of I guess what you call a 4-part pie. And in it, what I've put is gymnastics, running, rugby, judo and wrestling. So the reason that I put those things in there was gymnastics. I actually did gymnastics. And that was really a great, I guess, what would you call it? A supplemental training in understanding your body, how to use it, how to control it, how to discipline it, and what was actually possible. I was a talented, not top level, but a talented tumbler when I was a kid. And I think there was a couple of, I did a couple of gymnastics classes, and I did a lot of trampolining, but there was a couple of formative experiences that kind of, I was quite a shy kid and did not take looking foolish or feeling like I was looking foolish very well. So there was a couple of things, unfortunate things that kind of happened with teachers who kind of made fun of me and kind of withdrew. But I wish that I'd kept up with gymnastics, or at least learned the methodology. Underneath that, I have running. Now, I've never been a fan of running, of cardiovascular. Well, no, I can't say that. I did run when I was younger, probably between my 20s, between 20 and 40. At certain times, I was running quite intensively, but I never really learned how to enjoy it. And I think that I always treated it like something that I had to do, but not something that I love to do. So I would have loved to have been coached in actually how to run and how to continue doing that. In later life, I think it would have helped, keep my weight in a more manageable level. But, que sera, sera, as they say. So, yeah, definitely running, gymnastics. And then I've got judo and wrestling. Now, the reason I say judo and wrestling is because I think judo and wrestling offer really tactile skills. In judo, the idea of being able to use other people's weight, there's a certain robustness to the training, and you're always training with someone in relationship to someone. With wrestling, my younger brothers were incredible Olympic wrestlers. I like Olympic wrestling. I'm not talking WCW professional wrestling. I'm talking about actual Olympic style wrestling, which I think is just such an important step in our martial arts. And I just think the body knowledge and just what would be the word? I guess just the oomph of being a wrestler, the way in which they train. I think you've got to be on top of your game. You've got to be fit. You've got to be flexible. I just sort of have so much respect for Olympic wrestling and, of course, judo. Then I've got underneath that rugby. Now, for any child growing up in New Zealand, or Australia for that matter, rugby is something akin to a national religion. And I had the kind of father and the kind of experience around rugby that kind of ruined the game for me. I was not a hugely competitive kid, but I liked the training. Apparently I had some skill at it, but it was just kind of one of those things where the association and I guess some of the stuff that came through in the rugby culture in terms of attitudes and so on did not sit too well with me. So I kind of shied away from rugby. I guess, maybe when I was about 12 or 13. And it was one of those things where I thought I had to do it, so I did do it. But I was definitely never a fantastic rugby player. Although I did one stunt double for Jonah Lomu, which is a whole nother podcast. So yeah, those combination of skills I think just build a really strong awareness in our body. And so that's me 10 to 15. So just to recap, gymnastics, judo, wrestling, rugby, and running, just as a base. Now, let's look at the period of time between 15 and 18 years. Now, I've got a box kind of in the middle, which I guess is another one of those things where if I could go back and make a exhaustive study and incorporate that stuff in, I definitely would. And that would be fitness, understanding biomechanics, nutrition, and recovery. Now, I didn't come to weight training until I was probably in my 20s. And I think that when I started to do resistance training, it made all the difference. So in terms of fitness and nutrition, like, to be honest, when you're that young and you're on the go, you can pretty much eat anything you like. But I think for a lot of reasons, nutrition is so important, not just about training, but it's about mood and mental health and maintaining your health, right? And then in that block, I've also got recovery. So understanding the importance of resting. When you pull a muscle and you can, on Friday and Saturday morning you're fine again, as young people want to be, you kind of just get on with it. And what happens over a period of years is those seemingly, those seemingly unimportant injuries, they will gather momentum. And later in life, you're going to be paying a price. So understanding recovery and how to treat injuries and those sorts of things would be really important. In terms of training, I've gone boxing, kyokushinkai, gymnastics, keeping rugby and keeping judo, and swimming. I think boxing because I remember I did some boxing as a kid for a few years and I just got my beans. I got absolutely... I went in there, I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I just remember, you had to hit pads, you had to produce power. The training was all based around functionality and you had to get in and spar. We were skipping, doing rounds, bag work, speedball, all of those sort of things. I was never a great boxer. I think I might have got to the level of, at my best, somewhat competent. Apparently I had a good right hand, although who knows now. I think if I threw a strong right hand, my shoulder would pop right out of the socket. But boxing, definitely. Kyokushinkai. Now, it's funny because I actually did Kyokushinkai as a teenager, so it's kind of not that different from what my travel actually was. What I really enjoy about Kyokushin as a fighting style is that it's about repetition. It's about real, meaty, robust training with a strong base in mental toughness. You just can't go past Kyokushin for developing that. And I was so glad that a lot of my formative Goju-ryu sensei had originally been Kyokushin sensei. And I like the way that influence came through in our training, because what happened was we were very big into repetition and sparring and conditioning and push-ups and running and all of those great things. And I think that builds a certain level of resilience, and I'm so glad for that. And I think it's a remarkable style in that regard. I don't know if I could have continued doing Kyokushinkai into my frail dosage. I think probably I would have fallen apart long ago, although that's not to say that that's why that style does as many wonderful, I guess, senior age practitioners. But for me, I know. But in that formative stage between 15 and 18, just having really devoted time and energy to Kyokushin, I think would really have created a strong base. Now, I've got rugby and judo in there as well. Again, rugby, the hard contact, judo, that tactile training, and swimming. Now, swimming, I wished that I'd done more swimming when I was younger, because it's a fantastic recovery method. We were talking about recovery before, right? And just a really great natural, I guess, equilibrium setter in terms of our physicality, injuries and all those sorts of things. I think swimming would have been really good, and it's just a great all-round exercise that I've kind of embraced in the last couple of years. Although some people have been quite negative about actual swimmers, have gone, you don't look like someone who would float, let alone swim, but I'm doing it and I bloody enjoy it. Okay, now we move over to 18 to 28 years old. So a big part of that pie graph is resistance training. As I said to you before, understanding resistance training, but not just lifting weights, but actually understanding different ways of using resistance in my training, being sports specific in the way that I did things. I think that'd be really cool. When I actually started lifting weights, and it was one of those sort of things where it was a bad breakup, and I decided I was going to get a revenge bod, or something equally egotistical and depression led. But I found that I really enjoyed lifting weights, and I still do. And I enjoyed, just the feeling of, I think for me, lifting weights and resistance training, yes, it added strength and mass and all these sorts of things. And probably the way that I trained in it back then was not the greatest, to be totally honest. I was training like, I don't know, curls for the girls, as they say. So aesthetics were really important to me. I don't know if I knew much about core, but I wanted to look good. Again, in the pie is Kyokushin, but I also would have done Kudo and MMA at that age. I think Kyokushin, again, I've spoken about the fantastic base that Kyokushin, in terms of fighting, I believe has. And Kudo, if you're not familiar with Kudo or Daido Juku, it's kind of like the Kyokushin format with grappling, and there's masks, and there's head punches, and there's grabbing and throwing and grappling and headbutts, and I kind of like that. I like that as a progressive step. I like that step towards I guess a larger utilization of all the techniques. And MMA, of course, MMA is again about putting all those elements together. I've also put into one of the quarters of the pie graph Muay Thai. I think Muay Thai, when I did Muay Thai when I was probably, golly gosh, I would have been in my early 20s, I found just being able to hit pads, being able to spar, elbows, knees, and the robustness of that training really taught me a lot. Not all of it was about becoming a great fighter. It was just about, for me, because I'm a big target, how to take punishment. But there were some valuable skills that I learnt doing Muay Thai, and I think if I devoted more time to it, I think I would have gotten more out of it. And of course, another section of that particular pie graph is BJJ. I like BJJ as a martial art. I'm not very good at it. I've never had much of a facility for it, but I enjoy it, and I think it's, I think there's this whole thing around, especially in karate, where we go, well, I won't be taken to the ground. But I don't think it's just about being taken to the ground. I think it's about, there is a whole bunch of strategic thinking, especially pressure testing, where BJJ is invaluable. And there's all sorts of ways to learn it. There's some fantastic teachers out there, and people have different approaches to teaching BJJ. Just from a purely cognitive perspective, I think that it's a great element to add to your training. I know of some really super senior sensei in North America who are like machines when it comes to karate and weapon work and aikido and jiu-jitsu and all that sort of stuff, but many of them do BJJ and are kind of like green belt, brown belt level or purple belt, but they absolutely love it. And I think it also teaches valuable skills, especially around humility, being able to know when to tap and getting past the idea that, we're all these insane weapons of destruction. Okay, let's go to 28 to 38. And now I'm 53, so that feels like a million years ago. So here's what it would have been. And if you look in I'll probably put I'll try and put this graph that I'm looking at, this little diagram that I've done, in the thumbnail so you can see. So 28 to 38, Gojuru, Aikido, Kobudo, Iaido, in terms of martial arts. Swimming stays. Yoga makes an appearance, and functional training. I think calisthenics training is what I'm really talking to there. I think yoga, because I like the mind-body connection, And I think there's probably some recuperative qualities in how, at least what my experience of yoga has been. Again, not great at it, but I certainly appreciate the approach and the mind-body sort of spiritual connection. Swimming, I found swimming to be a real boon in the last few years, and I wish that I had embraced it a bit younger. And Gojuru. Now, I'm an Okinawan Gojuru practitioner, and I think for me, what I really appreciate about Gojuru, and especially between the ages of 28 and 38, is as a fighter, I guess I would have been out of my prime. Perhaps my ego would have said otherwise, but I definitely would have been out of my prime. So, Gojuru is, at least in my experience, is an extremely circular style. It's about working very close in. It's about using a broad range of technique when it comes to self-defense. And I love bunkai, I love kata, so I guess that's kind of a no-brainer. Aikido, I think probably, if I'm being honest, I'm not holding myself up as any expert on Aikido, but I think styles like Yoshinkan, from what I've seen, I know there's many different iterations of Aikido, but I like, from what I've seen, the Yoshinkan mentality. And maybe it's kind of the idea of doing something quite systematic. But I think, yeah, Aikido would be a nice opportunity to sort of broaden the idea of fluidity. But of course, this is something I've made up, so how that would actually work in reality, I don't know. Now, I've introduced weapon work in the form of kobudo and yaido. So kobudo, I guess I'm thinking in terms of Okinawan kobudo. I like weapon work. I've always liked weapon work. I think that it works your martial mind, but doesn't kill your body, at least not to the extent that doing really high impact stuff does. And I think it works on distance and timing. And yes, people are going to say, oh, well, who's going to be walking around with a paddle or a pair of sickles or even a pair of nunchaku? Well, mind you, some people probably are, walk around the street. But I don't think it's actually about that. I think that it is about putting your mind and body reflexes in a different space. And I really like kobudo. Yaido, I think what I like about Yaido is that the idea of focusing on very subtle, almost unseen attention to technique, subtle shifts in your positioning, your feet, your stance or lack of stance, the idea of using a live blade that encourages and demands your focus, or else you're going to cut an ear off or you're going to hurt someone else. I think it's really good, and I think it's a wonderful way. I found, even now as I try to struggle through my Yodel training, it's a wonderful tool for focus, so I really like that. So yes, I actually still do that. Okay, last part, we come to 40 to 50 to 60 years and beyond. So I guess this is kind of a wish list. Some of this I'm doing, some of this I have to do, some of this I would like to do, some of it I probably will never get an opportunity to do, but here's where it's at. Pardon my coughing. So Yaido, Kobudo, Gojuru, Jiu-Jitsu, and that's in, Jiu-Jitsu is in, I guess, more Nihon or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Pilates, core, and functional fitness, swimming, walking. I've created a new word, walking, cycling, strength training, and observational training. So the idea for me, I guess you can kind of see how that's sort of changed. Some of that stuff is pretty much on the money in terms of what my experience was. Some of it's completely not. But I guess for me now, I'm focusing on trying to create longevity in my training. I had a training session last night in which, and at this point, I'm a month out. A month ago, I had a heart attack. And I think I pushed a little bit hard and I'm paying a little bit of a price for it. So I need to sort of get my ego to go and, go on a holiday, I think. But my point being, I want to try and find ways to continue training for my entire life so that it now is something which creates a quality of life. So if me and Tawa Sensei and myself want to go on a holiday and to go swimming, or you want to go hiking, or you just want to do those sort of things, that I can actually do that. I'd actually like to be able to do that. And if I have grandchildren one day, I'd love to be able to play with them. But, I think essentially what I'm looking at in my impression of this list that I made is that it's about creating a quality of life. It's about keeping myself cognitively challenged, about finding my habits in terms of training and enjoying that and continuing to do it. I feel so lucky that I'm able to do these things, and I feel so lucky that I'm able to talk to you about it. So it's been a bit of a fun experiment for me to write this down, and I think to a large extent, looking at it now, I realise how much of it I actually have done. I don't know if there's an element of ego in that for me, in terms of going, look how awesome I am, but there's a lot of stuff, as I said, that I didn't do, and I would like to do, and that I'm going to do. So here's what I encourage you to do. As a bit of a thought experiment, get a piece of paper and write down your martial arts journey in terms of when did you start training, and what have the elements been, and so on and so forth, and write down what you would have liked it to have been and what it actually has been, and then the correlations between what we would have done, what we could have done, and what we should have done can be really interesting and can be really instructional. And that's the cool thing about learning recipes and looking at cookbooks, because we get to have hindsight and figure out what ingredients we want to put in the mix and why it's so important to keep moving forward.